Welcome to your next home. This is the perfect room if you're looking to expand the family. It's perfect. There's a kids' room or a playroom.
Did you say playroom?
Yeah, playroom.
I've been very bad.
You know what, let me give you a moment. I'm gonna feed the pancake.
Yeah, you go feed the... whatever.
Good evening and welcome to episode 54 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. It's the Friday edition of the show. I'm sure many of you are excited to get the weekend started, even though we're all going to be at home, staying safe, making sure that we are, doing our best not to be out and about unnecessarily. But of course, we are talking all things property. And this evening, we're exploring the Community Schemes Ombud Services. You probably might not even know what they are, but if you're living in a community scheme, then they certainly do affect you in one way or another. And to help us better understand, firstly, what they even are, what their services are, how we can even utilize their services, this evening I'm joined by Zerlinda from Merwe, who's the co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants. Before we get to our conversation, we will, of course, be giving away that 5,000 Rand prize later on in the show, so you do not want to miss it. That is, of course, towards the tail end of the show, where we'll be giving away that money. We are, however, also still running that 1,000 Rand competition, and all you have to do to stand a chance of winning one of two 1,000 Rand cash prizes is to tell us what your property dreams, goals, and ambitions are. You all you have to do is just share them down below, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or even Instagram, or even actually our YouTube page, because I know some of you are watching us on YouTube. Share them down below, and you stand a chance of winning one of those two 1,000 Rand cash prizes. We'll be announcing the winner right here live on air next week, Friday. But we are, of course, talking all things community schemes. Zerlinda, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to the conversation this evening.
I think before we even look at, what community scheme ombuds is, what their services are, perhaps let's look at what a community scheme is, because I think we mustn't take it for granted that some of us might be living, in complexes or estates that are run by community schemes, but we're certainly not aware of what a community scheme actually is. Maybe you're getting that levy statement every month, but you're not really connecting the dots around this is what a community scheme is, and this is the function of living in a community scheme.
100%. That's a very good place to start. It's actually one of the first things that the Community Scheme Ombud Service Act deals with, and that's the definition of what a community scheme is. I mean, we all know what a block of flats is, so a body corporate or a sectional title scheme. It then goes further to homeowners associations, and homeowners associations can be common law or they can be non-profit companies. Then we start looking at housing cooperatives, share block schemes, although they're not as popular as they once were. Retirement developments can also be community schemes, and there are various different ways in which retirement schemes are set up. So basically anywhere where there is shared resources, which is common property, shared facilities, where you have people living in quite close proximity to one another. Very often we look at a scheme and it looks like a homeowners association simply because it's, for example, a townhouse complex, and then we find out that it's actually a sectional title scheme or body corporates. So it doesn't necessarily mean if we're driving along the beach and there's a whole lot of high-rise buildings that is the only form of body corporate or sectional title scheme out there. It does go further. And the way that we can identify it is by looking at its governance documents. If it falls under the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, if it falls under the Companies Act, if it has a constitution or a memorandum or a set of rules, these are the identifying features. But there are very different forms of community schemes. So it's important to understand, number one, which type you reside in, and more importantly, to recognize what the responsibilities and definition of that community scheme is.
So then let's look at what the Community Scheme Ombuds actually is. Because I'm sure, I mean, we have so many different types of governing bodies in the different things that we probably do, you know, from banking to, you know, even within the property space, there are other ones. And I think so many of us probably don't even reach out to try and use some of their services because we either A, don't know that they exist, we don't know the work that they do, and we don't know that we can access them when we are struggling with the particular thing that we are facing at that time. What exactly is the Community Scheme Ombud?
So the Community Schemes Ombud Service, or CSOS, have been around since October 2016, when the legislation was officially promulgated, the Community Schemes Ombud Service Act, which happened at the same time as the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. That being said, they've been around for a lot longer than that, simply, you know, in its formation stage and dealing with the legislation, setting the legislation up, the legislation obviously having been in progress since 2010, 2011, if not earlier. The Community Scheme Ombud Service was set up to deal with all forms of community schemes. Very often we find that in a community scheme, there's not many options for us to deal with perhaps rule enforcement or dispute resolution. Our South African sectional title legislation has very often been referred to as a piece of toothless legislation. In other words, something where we have, you know, a whole lot of rules, which we spoke about last time, but not many enforcement mechanisms, which obviously lead to disputes. And previously, under the old Sectional Titles Act, if the body corporate and owners, or if owners amongst themselves had disputes, they had to institute sometimes quite lengthy and expensive proceedings, either through arbitration or alternatively through the court system. The same would be said for a homeowners association or a share block scheme or retirement development. Normally arbitration was the route to go, first mediation and then arbitration, which unfortunately wasn't as quick and less expensive as what it should have been or necessarily intended to be. That's why the Community Scheme Ombud Service was set up. It was to deal with and to serve all community schemes across the country. And very often I still consult with clients, be it trustees or owners, that don't know of the existence of the Community Scheme Ombud Service, quite interestingly. But every single community scheme has to be registered with the Community Scheme Ombud Service. Every single scheme with individual levies of more than 500 Rand have to contribute on a monthly basis and then pay over on every 3 months or quarterly basis to the Community Scheme Ombud Service, you know, a fee or a levy towards the upkeep and running of the Community Scheme Ombud Service. When your rules change in a body corporate, it has to go to the Community Scheme Ombud Service. When you have a dispute in your community scheme, be it an owner, a tenant, the trustees against owners amongst themselves, against the managing agent even, it goes to the Community Schemes Ombud Service. So no longer the courts, unless the matter is not one that can be dealt with by the Community Scheme Ombud Service or is urgent, then it has to go to the Community Scheme Ombud Service. So the first and foremost goal of the Community Scheme Ombud Service is to form a dispute resolution tribunal, basically, for community schemes. And the Community Scheme Ombud Service Act sets out a list of different prayers of relief. So in other words, the different categories of issues in community schemes that they deal with. If it relates to, you know, a dog that has been kept in the scheme against the trustees' approval or authority, or have breached conditions, or if it's somebody undertaking illegal renovations and alterations, you know, somebody that hasn't been paying their levies. These are the types of things that go to the Community Scheme Ombud Service. It's very rare when a situation does not fall within one of the particular orders that the Community Schemes Ombud Service can grant. And right at the end of the list, under Section 39 of the Community Scheme Ombud Service Act, is a nice little catch-all provision about the Chief Ombud making a directive as to any other types of matters that the Community Scheme Ombud Service can deal with. So that is the type of thing that the Community Scheme Ombud Service deals with. They also are the custodians of body corporate rules, management rules and conduct rules. When they're amended, they review them, they approve them, they go back to the trustees and say they've got, you know, certain concerns or certain issues with some of the rules. Perhaps the rules are not reasonable, they're not constitutional, they're not enforceable. So these are the types of things that they look at for body corporates. For homeowners associations and other types of schemes, although they don't review the rules, they do give guidance, they do request a copy of the rules or the constitutions or memorandums along with the annual returns. And that means that they are the record keepers or custodians for this type of information. They also offer training to the industry, to who they call stakeholders, to owners, to trustees, to tenants, to managing agents, developers, attorneys. And very often they travel across the country, their 3 offices being in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban, serving all the provinces. They engage with managing agents, engage with owners to form training sessions and opportunities to teach communities a lot more about community schemes. There's so much lack of knowledge out there, but so much information to impart, and the Community Scheme Ombud Service is definitely doing its part in that. But I think they're definitely kept busy with all the disputes that happen in community schemes. We very often say that co-ownership is the mother of all disputes, and it's very, very true.
And it's actually, you know, one of those things, you when you look at how oftentimes perhaps we probably grew up living in individual homes, you can already imagine some of the disputes you'd have with your family when it comes to certain things. Sometimes perhaps family members might want to perhaps put a back room or build a back room or extend the house in a particular way, and other members of the same household, you know, might have an issue. It's sometimes even difficult to try and resolve that as a family. I can imagine the moment we've got, you know, 200, 500, sometimes even 1,000 families living in one yard, and essentially having to try to coexist as much as possible, having to use the common areas as efficiently as possible, that there certainly are going to be people who don't abide by some of the rules. And I mean, I've certainly experienced that. I live in a community scheme, or in a property that's in a community scheme, and there are always challenges that you essentially face, whether it's, you know, things like noise. Luckily, we don't allow dogs in ours. It's only cats, thankfully, so we never have to deal with, you know, barking dogs or dogs wandering around. But there always are issues. So, you know, even people who want a cat, you need to apply to the body corporate in order for them to say yes, you can actually get that cat. And oftentimes we're just not used to having so much of our behavior regulated like that. And it's because it's such a foreign concept, certainly to us. Of course, if you're watching us at home, we are taking your questions and comments. This evening, I'm joined by Zerlinda from Merwe, who is the co-founder and director of TVDM Consultants. We are looking at, you know, exploring the Community Scheme Ombud Services. And perhaps you've had a run-in with them, or you've certainly had some issues with, you know, within your own community schemes. Do send them through, and Zerlinda will be addressing them. Zerlinda, we've got a question here from Vusi Raymond Ngwenya, who asks, is there an age limit to be part of a body corporate? For most cases, it's always individuals who are mature in age.
That is quite interesting. I also find very often that the majority of trustees are retirees. And, you know, I think the reason behind that is because if you're going to dedicate yourself to being a trustee, it does take up a lot of your time. And the more time you put into the body corporates management or the homeowners association management, whatever your scheme is, you know, the more time is required of you. So it's basically like this endless pit, and the time is not, you know, paid for. You get compensated for disbursements, but it's very rare that you actually get compensated for your time, and it's something that requires quite a high level of consent of your fellow members. So yes, it is very often the retirees that are on the trustee committees or the boards of directors, and very often we joke and we say that these directors or trustees still have their like Coca-Cola company mentality. So in other words, their corporate mentalities, and that's the way they run the body corporates and homeowners associations as well. And you know, we were chatting earlier about how it's a younger generation buying into schemes, and we think differently, and we are okay with a bit of noise, and we're okay with a little bit of barking dogs and roaming cats and all that fun stuff, but perhaps other generations are not. That's why we've got retirement developments, and people don't like to hear that either. So, you know, different strokes for different folks type of thing, and different schemes obviously have to accommodate, and the rules need to accommodate you know, the different type of residents, age groups, interests, you know, if they're kids, if they're no kids, if pets are allowed, if pets aren't allowed. But no, there isn't an age limitation. Interestingly enough, I've never actually been asked this question before, but one can imagine that if trustees can be held personally liable, which is unfortunately quite a scary concept, but it is a known fact that if we act fraudulently or in a grossly negligent way at least, we can be held personally liable for the decisions that we take or lack of decisions that we take. So one would then assume that you would need to at least be, you know, a legal age of majority. You know, there's no such thing as having too little or too much time to be a trustee. One really needs to have a passion for it, and very very often, unfortunately, one becomes a trustee simply because you're motivated by a personal endeavor. Either your dog application wasn't granted, or you want to go up face to face with this director that's 90 years old in the shade, or whatever it might be. So very often it's a self-centered reason for becoming a trustee. But very often these trustees find that if they're going to be successful, if they're going to be an asset and act in the best interest of their body corporates, they need to almost like take off the hat that they're wearing about their personal interests and personal desires and really act to the benefit of the entire body corporate or the entire homeowners association.
And I think, one of the things, so I'm also a trustee in some of the, blocks where I own. And I think something to bear in mind is you sometimes take on the responsibility because you also want to just take care of your own investment. When you have a better sense of how that particular block is being run, you know that the financials are strong, you know that whether the building or the lifts, whatever different services that are offered in that particular property or estate, when you know that they're being taken care of, it also puts your heart at ease because you know that your investment is taken care of. Because we've certainly seen a lot of different developments or blocks of flats where the location is great, and sometimes even the rental price point or average is relatively good, but because it's not being adequately run, the stage of the building or the stage of that particular estate deteriorates quite drastically, to the point where sometimes, I have a friend who stays in a community scheme, and she was actually saying how they've had multiple bonds of people who wanted to buy her property being declined because the financials are in such bad state. And so you realize that when the body corporate or the managing agents don't adequately do their job, it also means that if you're a current owner, you now can't sell your particular property. And it obviously does put you in quite a difficult position because you certainly want to move, or some people certainly want to be buying into that, estate, and they're unable to do so because the banks are like, this is actually too risky. It's not being adequately run. We know that our investment, or rather the money that we put in, is not going to be well taken care of. So it's also just understanding as consumers. So, certainly not all of us are going to be trustees, but as consumers, how important the role of the trustees essentially is. And as thankless of a job as it is something that does need to be done, because at the end of the day, we're essentially all taking care of our respective investments. So, Zerlinda, we're going to go for a quick break. And when we come back, I actually wanted to chat a little bit about the managing agent themselves, because I think some people probably don't quite understand the function of the managing agent, some of the things that they do, because you might perhaps have challenges with them, and chances are you don't even understand where they fit into the grand scheme of things. So you have the body corporate or the trustees, and then there are these managing agents, and emails are being sent to different people, and you're not quite sure what the ecosystem looks like. And so certainly understanding what they do and which matters they deal with, because we also know that trustees make certain decisions that are executed by the managing agent, as opposed to the managing agent dictating to the trustees about what needs to be done. We're going to be back just shortly after this, and of course later on in the show we will be giving away that 5,000 Rand prize. If you have any questions or comments, do send them through. We'll be addressing them. Maybe you've had an issue with your body corporate or the managing agent. Do send them through, and Zerlinda will be more than happy to address them. We'll be back just after this. Tips for dealing with the bank. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate.
Understanding the basic calculation, income minus expenses, and you want to be left with a positive income.
It is a very tough game. It's not easy at all.
To stay ahead of knowing exactly what your clients need, what their teething issues are.
Have a joint move-in inspection.
That a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are, just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes.
They get to see the perspective from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
It's a market that's estimated to be transacting at least 9 billion Rand per year. So it's a huge market.
In order to get there, you need to be able to build up a track record.
Your cash flow model needs to be sharp.
A quote comes to mind. The best time to buy a property was about 10 years ago. The next best time is now.
Welcome back to episode 54 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Kumalo. This evening, I'm joined by Zerlinda van der Merwe, the co-founder and director of TVDM Consultants. And we're exploring the Community Schemes Ombud Services. So you've probably never heard of them, even though you might be living in a community scheme, and really unpacking some of the services that they have and the different ways that we can essentially tap into them in the event where, you know, there's certain things that we need to resolve, and perhaps you're struggling to have it resolved with the particular body corporate or the community scheme that you are a member of. Now, Zerlinda, before the show, I did say I actually want us to look at what the managing agent does, because I think before you even go to trying to access the services of the Community Schemes Ombud, there would have been other things you would have done prior to it reaching that level, and you would have tried to remedy the situation first within, whether it's the body corporate or the homeowners association or the managing agent, and only when you probably are struggling with having your issue resolved would you then seek the services of the Community Schemes Ombud. And we'll talk a little bit later on how people then access their services. Are they going still via the managing agent or the body corporate that they are aggrieved by, or do they contact them directly? But before we get to that, what exactly is a managing agent, and what do they do when we are living in community schemes?
So you're quite right. That's definitely the process that needs to be followed. So the Community Scheme Ombud Service actually requires that any applicant prove that they've exhausted their internal remedies before making an application for dispute resolution, either through the process of conciliation and then adjudication, or either or. And the managing agent does have a very big role to play in that regard as well. Now, my background is that I myself have been a managing agent and managed body corporates, share block schemes, retirement developments, homeowners associations, and have very often been involved in a situation where the role that we've played has definitely assisted in a matter not going to the Community Scheme Ombud Service. But very often, unfortunately, applicants do not want to engage with the trustees and directors, or even a fellow owner or the managing agent. Sometimes their demands exceed what can be met or dealt with by a managing agent or the trustees, and they do go to the Community Scheme Ombud Service in any event, even when a solution possibly was practically achievable if that internal remedy had been followed properly in due course and in good faith, more importantly. So the managing agent, you should rather ask, what does a managing agent not do? Because their list of responsibilities and functions is quite excessive, depending scheme on scheme and management committee upon management committee. There are many different types of managing agents. Some of them offer a full service managing agency, so everything from administrative management and secretarial, financial and physical management as well. Very often, some other managing agents only offer administrative management or administrative and financial management. They don't maybe attend trustee meetings, don't attend general meetings, but generally speaking, managing agents pretty much do everything on behalf of a body corporate or homeowners association, and work in conjunction with the executives that the Community Scheme Ombud Service calls it, of the trustees and directors, as well as perhaps a building supervisor or building manager, estate manager, CEO, whatever the title might be on the on-site management front. So when it comes to a managing agent, the contract at the end of the day, the management agreement that is entered into between the managing agent and the trustees and directors gives one a good impression of what the managing agents are responsible for. And under the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, it speaks about the functions and powers of the trustees being delegated to agents, including managing agents. Now, that delegation of that function and power is not necessarily, as you mentioned, a decision-making power. That is very much reserved for the trustees, and the directors are the ones that actually make the decisions. Agent very much, and you quite correctly put it as, execute those decisions. However, they do guide and they do assist their trustees and directors as much as possible. I recently had a consultation with an owner, and they said, surely it's the responsibility of the managing agent to give advice to the trustees and to almost force the trustees to do the right thing. But that's unfortunately not the case. We can huff and puff as much as we want as managing agents and make sure that it's minuted that we said, the proverbial is going to hit the fan if X, Y, and Z is not followed. But if the trustees or directors choose to not follow that advice, then unfortunately the managing agent still has to act on instructions. I know of managing agents that will rather walk away from a contract than do something potentially or actually in contravention of the legislation or in contravention of the governance documents. However, it's not very often that one as a managing agent wants to lose contracts, because obviously your income is very much directly linked to the number of schemes that you manage. And very often the smallest scheme causes, the most headaches in regard to the amount of time that needs to be spent on it versus the bigger ones or the higher income earning properties. So a managing agent has to be very cautious when they deal with these types of schemes. But managing agents deal with the correspondence from owners. They give advice and guidance to trustees and directors. When they're not able to do so, that advice and guidance obviously gets referred to to specialists, attorneys. We were chatting before the show about a waterproofing project. So managing agents can put the trustees into contact with contractors that they know have done a good job at certain schemes, or give them some advice against certain contractors if they've done not so good a job at a scheme. To assist the trustees in the preparation of budgets, to put information together for annual financial reports, to call and deal with the administration behind general meetings, special general meetings, annual general meetings, minute taking, which is a secretarial function, financial management, collection of levies, and dealing with those proceedings up until handing it over to a levy collection attorney. So a managing agent's job is incredibly multifaceted. Very often in practice, we joke, and as a managing agent, I joke more often, that we're expected to be everything for everyone. So that is very often the trustees and directors of a scheme believe that that is the only scheme that you as a managing agent manage. Business-wise, that makes absolutely no sense. But in their eyes, they want you to be available, 2 minutes after they send the email, or to take every single telephone call and to deal with their issues, above the issues of all else. You're expected to be the plumber, the electrician, and more importantly, sometimes the psychologist or the psychiatrist as well. But unfortunately, that all falls above and beyond the scope of a managing agent. But simply put, it's those functions and responsibilities of trustees and directors that are delegated to managing agents to execute. The decision-making, and more important, the liability and responsibility behind those decision-making or decisions taken definitely still rests on the trustees and the directors, and the managing agent simply guides and assists where possible and when they actually are able to within their skill set, qualifications, etc., etc.
And Zerlinda, then in the event where you've certainly been dealing with, whether it's the managing agent, the body corporate, and you're still having difficulty in your issue being remedied, how do people then go about contacting the Community Scheme Ombud?
It's a very simple process. If you go onto the Community Scheme Ombud Service website, you simply download an application form. It's an application for dispute resolution. It's a very simple form, 4 or 5 pages to complete. You can complete it online. They ask questions like, what is your name? What is your role in the scheme? Are you dealing with a body corporate, a homeowners association, a retirement development? Are you an owner, a trustee, a tenant, a managing agent? Your contact details, the contact details of the scheme. It asks you to set out the facts briefly. So in other words, what is the problem? And they don't expect you to write like an attorney. They simply want you to put your issue or your story in writing to them. They'll ask you to attach documentation. For example, if your issue is regarding the governance documentation of the scheme, so then a copy of the rules, the constitution, or the memorandum. If your issue is levies, perhaps, or levy contributions, how it's calculated, you would attach a copy of the budget, maybe a trustee resolution, the annual financial statements, your levy statements. If you have an issue with any decisions that have been taken by the trustees or directors or the members, you would attach the minutes of those meetings. And then you would ask the Community Scheme Ombud Service for a certain prayer of relief. So in other words, what do you want? If it is a levy that you believe hasn't been calculated correctly, you're going to ask for the reconsideration of the calculation of that levy, or perhaps a repayment of a levy. If you're a body corporate and you make an application against a debtor, you would ask for the payment of the levy or the attachment of the rental of the unit if perhaps there's a tenant living in the unit. So you're going to be asking for what you want. It's so simple to write it quite clearly and succinctly. And my advice to clients always is to less is more. So keep your story, I like to call it, in a chronological order, that if somebody reads that, they're able to immediately understand exactly who you are, exactly who the party on the other side is, exactly what the issue is, and more importantly, exactly what you want out of it as well. And then you need to sign it off and date it as well. And then obviously attach all of that supporting information, and you can either hand deliver it, send it by post, fax, or email to the Community Scheme Ombud Service through a central email address that is specified on their website for every single jurisdiction. That application will then be reviewed by the Community Scheme Ombud Service to see whether or not it involves a community scheme, to see whether or not the parties are materially affected, have an interest in the scheme, to see whether or not their issue and the prayer is something that the Community Scheme Ombud Service can deal with. If it's not, they'll come back and advise that it's not a matter they can take on. If it is, they'll ask for an application fee to be paid. That application fee is a whopping 50 Rand, which is obviously why the Community Scheme Ombud Service is as busy as what they are. But again, the Community Scheme Ombud Service is funded by that 2% above 500 Rand levies of every single community scheme payer or levy payer in the country. So that's why the fees for applications are quite as low as what they are. Once that matter has been accepted, the Community Scheme Ombud Service will send the application to the other side, so the other party, who's called the respondent. And that can be the body corporates if the applicant is an owner, for example, or a group of owners if, for example, the applicant is the body corporate or the homeowners association or whatever community scheme it might be. That party will then have an opportunity to review that application and respond. So they can then say, oh, this applicant is talking absolute nonsense. That's not what happened at all. And here's all the documents to prove that they're talking absolutely nonsense. Or they can say, you know, wow, that's something that I hadn't seen before. Yes, but perhaps we should look at X, Y, and Z. I'm making it very simple, obviously. And then the applicant will have another opportunity to have a look at that respondent's reply, and then obviously go back to the Community Scheme Ombud Service with further information if needed, and then additional supporting documentation. Now, that doesn't need to be very comprehensive. We're not quite yet going to trial, as we say. So you can simply just deny the allegations that are made, or you can agree, or you can add to it, but it doesn't have to be too comprehensive at this point in time. If the matter is something that the Community Scheme Ombud Service believes can be resolved through a process of conciliation, or should they feel that perhaps the internal remedies weren't followed to conclusion, or that there's still an opportunity to resolve it through this type of means, the Community Scheme Ombud Service will refer it first to conciliation. And that conciliation will happen at the moment over the telephone or remotely. It's not something that is being dealt with face-to-face at the moment during the lockdown at times, but very often it happens face-to-face in the offices of the CSOS, alternatively over the telephone. So it all depends really when that application is made. If the parties are able to resolve their dispute at conciliation, the conciliator will prepare a settlement agreement for both parties to sign and agree to. If that settlement agreement is not abided by, any one of the parties can once again institute the proceedings and pick up from where they left off, or make that settlement agreement an adjudication order. If no resolution is met at conciliation, the matter gets referred to adjudication, and the applicant has an opportunity to decide whether or not they want to continue. That adjudication process is a bit more formal, but not as formal as court in the slightest. The parties will have a further opportunity to put more information forward. The adjudicator, through the investigator of the CSOS, may require further information. They may require the investigation on site, like an in situ inspection. Or they may require evidence to be given. So perhaps in a waterproofing matter, like we spoke about earlier, they could ask, for example, for a contractor to become involved to give evidence on a matter, or give information or clarify a point. That adjudication proceeding can be as short as 2 hours or as long as a couple of days. It all depends on the matter. Once that adjudication has been dealt with, the adjudicator has the option to ask for further information or submissions, heads of argument, it's sometimes called, written submissions. Then they'll consider it all and make an order. That order of the adjudicator is final and binding. It cannot be reviewed, and it can only be taken on appeal to court if there is an error in law. So if the adjudicator has made a mistake in law, not if the parties don't agree to it, or if they feel aggrieved by it, they simply don't want to comply to it. That's not how it works. So it is quite a a streamlined process, and especially under the lockdown provisions or times that we're facing, the process is a lot quicker, simply because the matter can be dealt with on the papers or over the telephone, as opposed to arranging dates and times when people are available and all that fun stuff. But it's very much served for individuals to be able to represent themselves. Very often they need a little bit of legal guidance before and during the proceedings. Sometimes they need the attorneys to go with them to hold their hand, or to take part in the fist fight if the fist fight has to happen. But generally speaking, the Community Scheme Ombud Service wants the parties most directly affected to sit around a table together, either physically or proverbially, and actually come to a resolution, which is why the conciliation stage is as vitally important as what it is.
We are, of course, taking questions and comments from our viewers at home. Zerlinda, we've got one here from Stephanie Whitboy, who asks, I was wondering what happens if you fail to pay your levies. Can you actually lose your property? Also, if you purchase an apartment, should you ensure that the levies are up to date, or the expenses fall on you after the OTP has been signed?
Quite interesting. So I'll deal with the second part of the question first. The only time you as a purchaser will be responsible for any outstanding levies and charges is if you buy the property on sale and execution. And then you'd be responsible for outstanding rates, you'd be responsible for outstanding levies. But if you're buying it in private treaty, then you wouldn't be responsible for that. The only thing you would be responsible for is any outstanding amount or an amount yet to be accrued of a special levy. Under the Sectional Titles Act, when you sold your unit, you had to pay the full special levy, even if it was still going to be paid over an installment period. Now, under the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, you as a seller only pay your pro rata portion, and obviously the purchaser pays the remainder. For example, had to be raised over 6 months and you sold your unit 3 months, that would be divvied up accordingly. You can very possibly lose your units in a sectional title scheme or your IRF in a homeowners association if you don't pay your levies. It's not something that happens overnight. It's quite a long process. It is a process that the Community Scheme Ombud Service can deal with. They can even attach the rental that your tenant pays for the apartment or for the home as payment towards the levy. So they do have quite far-reaching powers in that regard. But generally speaking, most levy collection matters still happen through courts, magistrates' courts or high courts, depending on the quantum of the levies outstanding, which is why it's so vitally important for managing agents, for trustees, directors to keep an eye on those levies, to make sure that the proceedings that can be instituted are done so as quickly as possible to ensure that body corporate or HOA is not out of pocket with too much money too quickly. Now, the process is quite a lengthy one. It starts off with a final demand, summons, default judgment, warrants of executions, all that fun stuff. But if an owner is not going to make any type of arrangement, any type of settlement, not going to, raise legitimate arguments or defenses to the raising of levies, perhaps there wasn't a proper AGM or a proper budget passed or a trustee resolution or a special levy was invalid. If you don't have any of those arguments and you simply don't pay, your property will be attached and the property will be sold on auction, and the purchaser will have to pay any outstanding levies before the body corporate will issue a levy clearance certificate, or the HOA will issue a clearance. So yes, it is very possible to lose your home, but the process is not a quick one, and a decision like that is not taken very easily, but it definitely can happen.
The last question for this evening, Zerlinda, comes from Malebu Makahane, who asks, does the home insurance that's included in levies for sectional titles cover the payment of the house if something were to happen to you?
So unfortunately not. I'm assuming the member of audience is speaking about almost life insurance that you would get for the bond payment, for example. So the insurance that you contribute to as part of your levy in a body corporate doesn't cover that. It also doesn't cover contents of your unit. I like to explain it: if you had to take a building, take the roof off, turn it upside down and shake it around, anything that falls out is your responsibility as an owner. Anything that remains, fittings and fixtures, the walls, floors, ceilings, roof, windows, doors, that forms part of the body corporate insurance that you contribute to as part of your levy according to your participation quota. If the bank, for example, needs additional premium, if you've got gold-plated taps and marble countertops and all that fun stuff, if you've done improvements, alterations, renovations, added to, extended your section, that additional additional cover would need to be paid above and beyond your levy contribution by you directly as the owner, as it's not a body corporate expense. Things that are covered in terms of the body corporate insurance is if your geyser had to burst, or you had to experience resultant damage from the units above that ran their bath all night and the bath water ran over into your unit, or somebody's shower floor was leaking and damaged your unit. That is the type of thing that you would have a claim for, but not in the event of your unfortunate passing if your bond has not been paid. That is something that you would need to sort yourself with life insurance.
Zerlinda, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And that is Zerlinda van der Merwe, who's the co-founder and director of TVDM Consultants. We're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, it's of course that time of the evening where we give away that 5,000 Rand cash prize. You do not want to miss this one. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 54 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. It is, of course, that time of the evening where we're giving away that 5,000 Rand prize. Remember that for the next few episodes, we'll be giving away this 5,000 Rand prize at the end of each episode on our, of course, lucky draw. And these are the three simple rules for this draw. Firstly, the competition is open to people who entered the 100,000 Rand competition and only them. This, of course, also includes estate agents, as they are not employees of private property. Secondly, one winner is going to be randomly selected at the end of each episode, and the winner will be announced right here live on air. And that last one, the private property team will be contacting the lucky winner after the show within 24 hours of the show to verify their details. And you're not required to say, the phrase that pays or anything of that sort when we verify your details. And in the event that we are unable to reach you, then the prize money will roll over to the following day. So we really do ask that when we give you that call, you pick up and you share your details with us so we can verify them. But without any more delay, we're ready to start with our picker. Of course, we have nearly 50,000 names that entered this. So it's just over 40,000 names that entered this particular competition, and the lucky winner will come up just shortly. And you know what? I always enjoy giving away money, and I always say I can't wait until we're able to give away a house, which I'm sure is going to be bigger, more fun. The stakes are obviously higher at the moment. It's a house. And we're now ready to see who this evening's winner is going to be. And that winner is Rudy Defenter. That is Rudy Defenter. You walk away with that 5,000 Rand prize. Congratulations. The private property team will be reaching out to you to verify your details before giving you that 5,000 Rand prize. Well, congratulations to all our winners. It's been a full week of giving away 5,000 Rand prizes. So that's literally 25,000 Rands that we've been able to give away. I'm sure that many of you are holding your thumbs, crossing your fingers to make sure that, or wishing rather, that you're going to walk away with that prize next week. We'll still be giving away that money next week. If you want to even up your odds, then do enter the competition that we're running. And the two winners are going to be announced next week, Friday. And that, of course, is where we're asking you what your property dreams, ambitions, and aspirations are. share with us what they are, and you stand a chance of walking away with that amount. Well, it is, of course, the weekend, if it means anything. I know a lot of us are going to Club Couch or maybe Club Bedroom and spending most of our weekend there. It's a cold front in Joburg, so I do hope that you're also keeping warm. We'll be back, of course, on Monday right here on the Private Property Podcast. But over the weekend, we haven't forgotten you. You get to watch the Developers Show, where you get to see some of the best properties that different estates and complexes have on offer. Do not want to miss that one. It's 1 o'clock both on Saturday and Sunday with Umandisa, so do tune in. We're back again on Monday. I hope that you'll be staying home and staying safe, and I will see you right here at 7 o'clock on Monday.
Hi, I'm Nicoline Terblanche, and I'm part of the SA Women's Hockey team. And I'm the Technical Director of Tax Hockey. And I'm also the assistant coach for the first team ladies. I moved to Ferry Glen about 5 years ago. Ferry Glen is a really safe place and the people are really kind. Some of my friends live very close by in suburbs like Equestria and Olympus. In the morning I will wake up, make myself a cup of coffee, go for a jog in the Ferry Glen Nature Reserve or even just in the neighborhood. It's safe, quiet, and the environment is really nice. I love Ferry Glen because I'm near the city but I'm not in the city. I like to go to Pretoria Country Club to clear my mind, on my own, to relax and just to enjoy a round of golf. In Pretoria East we really have nice places to visit like Mainland Mall and Brooklyn Mall that is really close by. There are also a lot of top schools in the area like Pretoria Boys High and Hoërskool Menlo Park. One of the most beautiful places to see the whole of Pretoria is the Fort Kapperkop viewpoint. And that's my neighborhood.
Welcome to your next home. This is the perfect room if you're looking to expand the family. It's perfect. There's a kids' room or a playroom.
Did you say playroom?
Yeah, playroom.
I've been very bad.
You know what, let me give you a moment. I'm gonna feed the pack.
Yeah, you go feed the... Whatever.
Tips for dealing with the bag. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate.
Understanding the basic calculation, income minus expenses, and you want to be left with a positive income.
It is a very tough game. It's not easy at all.
To stay ahead of knowing exactly what your clients need, what their teething issues are.
Have a joint move-in inspection.
That a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are, just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes.
They get to see the perspective from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
It's a market that's estimated to be transacting at least 9 billion rand per year. So it's a huge market.
In order to get there, you need to be able to build up a track record.
Your cash flow model needs to be sharp.
A quote comes to mind. The best time to buy a property was about 10 years ago. The next best time is now.